We discussed Joe Mixon's future in Cincinnati on yesterday's show. Joe Goodberry is back today to talk about another player that could be out the door. Jonah Williams has requested a trade. Let's go over his strengths, weaknesses, and if he'll play right tackle for the Bengals this season.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome into the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm James Rapine. No Jake Lisco again today, but Joe Goodberry is here. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. And like I said, this is a throwback to the throwback of Locked On Bengals. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe on YouTube, follow wherever you get your podcasts. And let's dive on in because, Joe, we talked about Joe Mixon yesterday. Today, it's Jonah Williams. He requested a trade. He wants out, set to make $12.6 million fully guaranteed, and I'll hammer that, fully guaranteed this season. And so he wants out of Cincinnati after the Orlando Brown Jr. deal leaked through Kelsey Conway. Someone did in Jonah's camp, it has to be, that he was unaware of them pursuing Orlando Brown Jr. and was caught off guard by it, blindsided, I think is the word Kelsey used, which made for some fun moments on social media. But let's just start with Jonah, the player. Where do you stand on him? Because, and I've said it multiple times on this show, if you're telling me Jonah's the right tackle, Orlando Brown Jr. is the left tackle, you have Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, and Alex Kappa on the interior, I feel pretty darn good about that offensive line.
Yeah, sign me up for that. And sign me up for knowing who your five starters are in March when this, the deal happened. Like, that was like appealing to me, very appealing. Like, going to the draft, you don't need to draft a guy. You draft anyone. Now you've upgraded the depth, which was a huge issue the last 2 years. So, I really like that idea of Jonah moving. I think it's interesting you brought up how he was blindsided and how that was reported or leaked, a week or so after the deal went down. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if that was almost them saying, Jonah's camp, that is, saying, yeah, we may have reacted out of emotion or initially saying trade us because we were blindsided by it. We didn't know this was happening. We were like, we thought we'd be in a contract year when you're 25 years old and you're the left tackle. I mean, you're in line to make some money if you can have a decent year, even an average starting year. We saw guys get paid this offseason who are average starting tackles. Now, I think Jonah had a below average year, but if we take the last 3 years, I would say he's an average starting tackle in the NFL. He would be in line to make a good chunk of change. So you would feel a little bit blindsided and maybe personally hurt at the idea that now you've been replaced and have to be moved to right tackle. But I think a lot of people would say, well, then play better and be more durable, and you don't have to worry about being replaced. I would say as of now, Jonah. So if he's an average tackle, and we know the prime years for an offensive lineman are 25 to 28 years old, right? It's usually that second wave, that second contract where you're fully physically mature.
And he's still young, 25.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So he's just now entering his prime years. His best years should be ahead of him. And I feel like we've said that a couple times in the last couple of years. So it's like starting to, not hold as much water anymore when you project these things. But Jonah, when we look at the 13 sacks, we look at how he's been beaten, we look at all of the other, 1,131 snaps he had this year, and judge him based on the last few years, where he's led the league in sacks now pretty much 2 years in a row. But he's still been a fine player if you use pass block efficiency. If you look at PFF grades, he's still starting quality player. Last year was below average, as we've said. I think the Bengals wanted the durability, they wanted the size, they wanted the strength at left tackle. They wanted somebody there that they didn't have to worry about getting beat as quickly. Or the one thing I don't think outsiders have mentioned, that when you watch Joe Burrow in the pocket, he will often slide to his left as he's dropping back. He's very often closer to Jonah than he is to the right tackle when he's in the pocket. And that's just must be a comfort thing with him, maybe a trust thing with him. He trusts Jonah a little bit more. But when Jonah gives up that pressure and it turns into a sack, I think sometimes it's because Burrow's a little close to him, but I also believe it's because he doesn't have that size, strength, and athleticism to win in that second and third phase, which is why the Bengals felt the need to upgrade at that position.
He gets knocked back, right?
He does.
That's part of it. And the size, the size is a good point because when Frank Pollock got here and returned to Cincinnati, and he wasn't there for the 2019 draft, but came back, one of the first things he said is, "Oh, we got to get Jonah bigger," and he wanted Jonah to put on some weight, and I get it, I understand that, and so now you have a guy in Orlando Brown that makes sense at left tackle for at least the Bengals. I know some other teams might have some beef with that, but you mentioned the sacks, and that's been what's really taking social media by storm. I don't think Jonah was good in 2022. There's no denying it. I don't. And yet I can also remember a world where last year when the Bengals were retooling their offensive line, no one was worried about Jonah. And it was, man, really the only hole is left guard. Will it be Jackson Carman? Should they draft? And I was on the Linderbaum train and moved Ted Karras over. What should they do? And that was the discussion. It wasn't, man, Jonah isn't working. And I think some people forget that, and the Bengals don't. I know firsthand they do not. And I think they look at it like, it may stink for you, but right tackles got paid this offseason. Move to right tackle and show the NFL that you can be durable and play at a high level around some other good players, and you're going to get paid this offseason, or next offseason, excuse me, from one of these teams if it isn't us.
And he's played right tackle at Alabama. When he first started in college, it was at right tackle. Now it's a long time ago now, but he has done it in the past. I think it's more of a thing where pride still wants to put these guys at left tackle, seeing how much more left tackles get paid versus right tackles, wants him to go to right tackle, or left tackle, I'm sorry. Same reasons Orlando Brown Jr. wanted to be at left tackle. Jonah wants to be a left tackle.
Can Mike McGlinchey, can he be Mike McGlinchey though?
Yes.
Because Mike McGlinchey got paid and he's an undersized right tackle.
Caleb McGarry got a decent deal. He got a little bit less than I think some were projecting, but he's better. I think Jonah's better than Caleb McGarry, and who got $11.5 million a year. So if you're in line for 12 to 15 million, I think even at right tackle, and we saw Jawan Taylor, who's been a career right tackle, get moved to left tackle, it appears. So like you can go play 1 year, Jonah, at right tackle, be durable, have a bounce back year, which I think would be two qualifications everyone's looking for. If you got back to the way you looked the previous 2 years, plus stay healthy like you did in 2021, you will get paid. You'll get your money's worth. So I think there is that aspect where there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but also, does he want to risk in a contract year? So the same reasons why you'd want to stay at left tackle and get paid. Do you want to risk moving positions? Because it's a catch-22. What if you do perform well? What are NFL teams going to say? Oh, he's a right tackle. He's actually not a left tackle. He's had his best year at right tackle. We were right. He's not a left guy. And then that comes, and then the trade part plays in. What if you go to a team that's like only willing to play you at left guard? Will the Bengals facilitate that trade? Would they agree to it? Or would Jonah say, I don't want to do that. I'd rather play right tackle than left guard.
But it doesn't matter. He doesn't have a no trade.
True. But could he approach them and say, you know what, I rescind here. If you guys are just going to take a 6th round pick, right? Like the Bengals are like, fine, we'll get the money off because you get all that money back. We talked about dead money with Joe Mixon. There's none of that with Jonah Williams. If you can trade him, you get that entire salary back against the cap. The Bengals would. So at some point, you may just say, I'll take a 5th round pick because I'll get that money back. Now, I don't think the Bengals would. But in that scenario where the other team's like, yeah, Jonah, we're going to play you at left guard and try and extend you to a contract because that's the other part. The other team probably would like to extend him and lower that cap hit. Would he agree to that to play a position that is generally less paid or a new position anyway? That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. And it starts with the Bengals being willing to trade Jonah for less than they are now. Because I think it's easily a day 2 pick asking price. And they may be asking for a 2nd rounder. Because they usually value their guys more than you, me, or the general public do.
And if you didn't make that clear, I think they value Jonah. They just saw an opportunity to upgrade.
They, no doubt, I think they value Jonah. And they honestly probably said, man, you've played through some injuries this past year. We think you're going to bounce back. Feel pretty good about it. Now, $12.7 million, there's a reason not to feel as good about it. But let's dive into what could happen in the draft, how that could impact Jonah, and continue to have this discussion because I think there's a lot here. We'll do that coming up next. But today's show is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. And Ultimate Football GM is the best mobile game out there. Why? Because you get to make these decisions, whether it's about Jonah Williams, whether it's about Joe Mixon, whether it's about different draft picks, and you don't want to take a running back high in the draft, even though Bijan Robinson is staring at you in the face. You can do all of those things, make all of those decisions, hiring coaches, hiring coordinators, adjust the finances so you can make sure you pay Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and all of the top Bengals players, Jamar Chase, of course, as well. It's a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is perfect, and you don't need Wi-Fi for it. You don't need service. All you need is the app. You can play it offline, which means it's perfect for flights. And Locked On Bengals listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all capitals in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. Again, that's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Joe, let's continue to have the conversation here, because let's assume that the asking price for Jonah is high and teams are just laughing. Do you think that the Bengals would drop that price a little bit if they're really high on DeJuan Jones and take him 28th? Or if they're able to get, Darnell Wright, who to me looks like a plug and play right tackle. I'd put him there this year. I would not let him sit behind Jonah. I think it would be a great pick if you're able to get Darnell Wright at 28. Would you drop your asking price, save that cap money, and move on for Jonah for less than what you're asking for right now?
Yeah, that's Jonah Williams could be a day 2, day 3 draft day trade, draft weekend trade, right? Because if that scenario played out where they take a right tackle, and this class has a lot of right tackles, which is interesting, which is not always the case. If you find a plug and play guy, and even DeJuan Jones, for his flaws and faults, I would think would be a plug and play right tackle as well. He has more issues than Darnell Wright, but he's going to survive in similar ways that Orlando Brown does at the tackle position. So you could see that spending a first round pick saying, we're going to play this guy right away. Now you go into day 2 of the draft, and maybe you're still saying, all right, we were asking for a second, but how about a third now? It's day 2, and Jets are still on the clock in the third round, and they haven't gotten their tackle yet. Well, we got Jonah for a third, and then maybe it doesn't materialize. And yeah, I would keep dropping my asking price, because at that point, you're basically selling that $12.7 million cap space for a draft pick, because you don't need Jonah because you have a replacement. So what is that pick worth to you? And honestly, that at some point, the pick value versus the cap value is going to meet or even outweigh. Like, I can get $12 million in cap space for a 5th round pick. And that's what I was alluding to, where it's at that point, it's worth it. That $12 million can go towards T. Higgins or Joe Burrow, or you could probably split $6 million between each one of them, and that would cover their 2023 cap hits after an extension. So I do think that's when it happens. That's the scenario you laid out.
Yeah, I think if there is a trade, and if I had to wager today, I would bet that Jonah Williams is the Bengals starting right tackle week 1.
Me too.
But that's the scenario where they look and they say, oh, we have this cost-controlled player that we had a really high grade on. And I really only think it happens in round 1. Like, I don't think Blake Freeland is going to give them that freedom, or insert whatever, the kid out of Syracuse. I don't think any of those guys are going to give them let's just move Jonah.
I will say DeJuan could be there that late.
If DeJuan Jones is there at 60, they may say, let's just go with the Twin Towers approach.
Exactly.
We know what we're getting. We know what we're getting at the tackle spots. They're big, they're physical. Because if Jones, you're right. I mean, he's the Orlando Brown Jr. of right tackles because he didn't test. He's huge, but he wasn't expected to test well, but he didn't. So there's a question there. So I agree with you.
And the way he kind of answered questions about not weighing in and showing there, apparently he showed up a little bit late and left the Senior Bowl, after one day. I think some teams are kind of like, let's see.
The Bengals drafted Andre Smith in the top 10 after his 40-yard dash. And people are going to be like, yeah, he was a bust. Actually, I think they would love to have Andre Smith level right tackle play for the next 4 to 5 years. I think DeJuan Jones, if he's there at 60, then it gets real interesting, right?
Move up to 50 for him, the way they did for Cam Taylor-Britt last year.
Well, they moved up from like 63 to 60 for Cam.
Yeah, it was just
60
small.
to 50. But yes, I agree.
Same idea.
Yes, yeah. But as far as Jonah's concerned, so we agree there that he's more likely here than not. They could trade him. Does the asking price meet things? Okay. Let's dive a little bit more into him, the player. I know you did some, but like people think that he's like this turnstile.
Right.
And I don't see that. I don't think NFL teams see that. His agent certainly doesn't see that. If he was a turnstile, guess what? The agent would not have came out and requested a trade. I promise you. You have to have some self-awareness. And I think his camp does. And they said, all right, well, we won out. All right. So how do you view him? You mentioned average, the word average. I think he was above average in 2021. I think he's been hurt a lot. I think he got dinged up at the end of 2020, obviously played through some stuff last year and couldn't finish the season. So where are you at on Jonah Williams, the player? Let's throw money out of it. Let's throw all this other drama out of it. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to expectations. I had a whole conversation, a podcast I did where I just talked about expectations when you draft a guy and what that guy can turn into. You know, do we think this guy's a future Pro Bowler, cornerstone player, Hall of Fame type potential? Potential gets thrown around a lot this time of year. I don't think we fully grasp how to measure it, right? So offensive linemen, traditionally through the years of doing draft work, you have to be an elite athlete and have decent size at the very least. You have to be an elite athlete because you're 9.9 times out of 10, the edge rushers, the top edge rushers in the league are elite of the elite athletes. They're probably the freakiest players on the entire football field from a height, weight, speed standpoint. Defensive ends are. You're asked to block these guys and block them for 59 out of 60 plays is, you know, if you win on those and give up a 1 sack on a third down, people are going to remember that 1 sack. So Jonah, when he came out, was an average testing athlete with below average size. It's the reason why a lot of teams looked at him and said, I think he's a guard. I don't think he's an offensive tackle. Some teams even thought, can he play center in the NFL? On tape, he was probably a top 6 or so player in that class. He goes at 11 at a premium position because a lot of teams didn't have him as a tackle. The Bengals drafted him, and the expectations at the time should have been he's probably going to be an average starter, and if he can become a master technician, he can become a good starter. Never probably a Pro Bowler or Hall of Fame level talent. He never was that. So I think if you realize those expectations, he hasn't missed them by much of what he was supposed to be. Now, the durability has been a big issue in the total picture. But when you look at Jonah Williams, he struggles with guys that are longer, struggles with guys that are powerful, more powerful than he is, because you're right, he does get blown back. There was a sack getting pushed around on Twitter against Isaiah Thomas, where that was the Browns. That was also the nightmare Halloween game where Isaiah Thomas, 6th-round rookie, beats him with a long arm chop, kind of a ghost move because he pulls it away at the right time, knocks the hand down, beats him around the edge. Jonah, you see him turn around quickly, like grab his helmet because he's shocked at how quickly he gets beat. But when you watch him, he leans in, plants his feet, and tries to dig and anchor because he's expecting the power move again, something that Isaiah Thomas did the last 3 rushes against Jonah to set it up. And so he's aware of his power limitations. He's aware of his strength limitations, and he's fighting against it in order to be a serviceable player. And I think even last year we saw, and it was right around the time the first kneecap started healing up. So halfway through the year where I thought the O-line as a whole started to gel, Joe Burrow started to take less sacks. That's part of him as well. When he started kick sliding really wide and getting out on rushers very quickly, exposing himself back to the inside where you've got a rookie 4th-round Division II FCS level player. So I think that hurt him a little bit having Volson there. Had it been a veteran guy like Quentin Spain the year before, he may have been more comfortable with the inside guy, but he was getting out so hard and so quick to get his hands on these rushers faster so that they couldn't build their speed to power and then get underneath him. And I thought halfway through the year, I'm like, Jonah's starting to click. He's starting to get into his stride of what the Bengals need at left tackle. And then he got hurt again. Everything started falling apart around them again, and right before the playoffs. So I think, what do you got with him? At best, he's an average starter at this point, but the durability probably hurts his value around the league and in the eyes of evaluators around the league because he's just an okay blocker, run blocker. I thought he was a better wide zone offensive tackle in terms of blocking. I think 2 years ago, 2021, he was the best run blocker on the team. Last year, when they go more gap power, it made him look worse. So again, we talk about Joe Mixon not fitting. Jonah Williams may not fit at tackle for them as much anymore either. But I will say this. In his 3 years starting, at no point has he been anything other than the best tackle on the team. That was with Bobby Hart on the other side, was clearly better than Bobby Hart. Riley Reif, I thought he was clearly in Jonah's best year was better than Riley Reif was, who was serviceable for his 10 games or whatever it was. And then last year, La'el Collins, who was supposed to come in and be that guy at right tackle, Jonah was clearly better than La'el Collins. I think at times, for most of the year, Jonah Williams was still their third best offensive lineman out of the 5 starters.
People are going to rip you to shreds for saying that, Joe Goodberry, but we will continue the conversation coming up next. Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, which means it's the perfect time to get your no-sweat first bet. All you have to do is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. And what's a no-sweat first bet? It's up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So if you wager on LeBron and the Lakers or Steph and the Warriors, or the Sacramento Kings, look at them winning the division. You can, and if you lose, that's all right. They have that no sweat first bet to catch you. You can also take a chance at an even bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Joe, let's keep things rolling here with the Jonah Williams conversation. I don't think that's crazy. And I think that in this social media world, groupthink becomes even easier. And it's like, oh, Jonah Williams is Bobby Hart, or Jonah Williams is, insert Andre Smith playing left tackle, which is a thing that happened at the end of his career, which is just unbelievable to think about, or is Cordy Glenn, or, insert whoever you want to. But I don't see that. I think that he was playing through injuries, and much like Joe Mixon in 2020, you get injured, you're not going to be the same guy. And Mixon wasn't able to play. Williams was able to be out there, and then he got hurt again. And so that's how I think the Bengals view it. Genuinely. I think good player. We picked up his 5th-year option. We're going to move you to right tackle. We think you're going to be really good there. I asked Frank Pollock about it. He thinks he's going to be able to do that. I know there's some on social media that say, oh, well, that's like switching hands while you do things, all of those things. Okay, fine. It might be, but the Bengals certainly think he can do it, and they're paying him guaranteed money to do so. The guaranteed money factor is something I really want to hit on, because these teams that would be interested in him, they have to take all of that on. The Bengals aren't going to say, all right, well, let's split the difference. They're not going to pay Jonah Williams $6 million to play elsewhere. I got news for you. Have you ever seen them do that? I haven't.
No.
And I don't think they would do it here.
No, I think other teams might explore that option, but that's not something the Bengals would do at all. Yeah. You're right. And I would challenge anyone to say you've got 5 months or so, 4 months to prepare Jonah. Challenge listeners to brush your teeth with your left hand or the opposite hand, whatever hand you may be, for the next couple of weeks. See how long it takes you until you're proficient again. And that's a mundane task. You're not, fighting off a 275-pound freak, Myles Garrett, while you do it, but that'd be fun to watch too. Put that on video, YouTube. You get a lot of hits there. But point in being here is, yes.
Wouldn't be much of a fight.
No, it would be interesting. You'd get that toothbrush out of your hand pretty quickly. Point is, that $12 million, right. I think that hurts his trade value. Now, a team could add void years onto him. They could extend him. But anyway, I think an acquiring team is going to want to lower that cap hit. And if the Bengals aren't willing to eat any of that, then yes, it's going to be in the form of an extension, which as of right now. So let's say we're the Bengals trading for Jonah Williams, everything we know about him and everything that he's been. What would we feel comfortable giving up for him? And how much of an extension will we be comfortable giving him? Honestly, I would be like third rounder for a starting tackle, because you can't draft a starting tackle in the third round. Typically, it doesn't normally happen. It's first 2 rounds or nothing, and you're really rolling the dice at the end of the second round. And then what would I be willing to pay him in the Caleb McGarry to Mike McGlinchey range? Maybe that's 12, 13, 14 million for like 3 years. I don't want to go 5 years and really hamstring myself in case he continues to have durability issues or really up and down play. That would really hurt the value in the future. But I think the other part of this is we've said the Bengals value him probably more than the outside world, but we've seen how fan reaction happens anytime a player either talks about being franchise tag, wanting to be extended, wants their money, or asks for a trade in this scenario. The fans turn pretty quickly on that guy. But I think from the Bengals' perspective, that asking for a trade is probably more out of character for Jonah than anything that they've seen in his 4 years. Like where they're looking at him like team first guy that'll play through injuries, super smart, super positive usually. Like he's what you want in that O-line room mentally. And so I think we can't forget that part is why the Bengals would probably, even if you only get a fourth round offer, they're going to say no. And they're going to line Jonah up at right tackle.
Yeah. I think unless they get that guy in the draft, and more than likely would have to be at 28. I think that's what they do. And the other part of this, you mentioned Lyle Collins. He's coming back. I don't see a scenario where Jonah and Lyle are both on the team. Now, maybe you keep Lyle. Yeah, maybe you keep Lyle if you trade Jonah and you save that money and you look at it as, hey, this is insurance for our rookie right tackle. But I don't see the scenario. So if they do decide to stick with Jonah, I think the writing, while they haven't made that decision yet with Collins, the writing is on the wall for him.
Yeah, I think they have time for all of these things. You could wait until after the draft. If a team doesn't get the tackle they want, it's a good tackle class, but it thins out very quickly in round 2. If you don't get the tackle you want, you may be more interested or more inclined to call about Jonah. And the Bengals have time to figure out how healthy Leal will be. So even if the other part is right, if they draft a starter at right tackle, then someone else probably isn't getting their starter, and you trade them, as we said, on draft day or draft weekend. And then you see how healthy is Collins, bring him into camp. If he gets healthy earlier than expected, if not, if he goes on the PUP list, you bring him off that halfway through the year and he's now depth and doesn't cost you very much because he missed half the year. I think that is a scenario where all options are on the table with all these, but they're in no rush. I don't think they have to make a decision now unless someone comes and knocks their socks off with a trade offer.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm trying to think if there's any other angles. Is there any other angle or thought that you have on this situation?
No, the idea of having all 5 starters, though, going into this draft, I was asked on Twitter a couple of days ago, of the main positions that we've seen mocked to them, which one do you think is a scenario where they don't even draft it? And I said offensive tackle. Like in that scenario where they get there and the guy's just, Darnell Wright's not there. They don't think Anton Harrison can move the right tackle. They get to round 2 and DeJuan Jones is already gone. They don't think highly of Matthew Bergeron. Neither do I. They don't think high enough on Blake Freeland. They just don't get a guy. And it just moves on. And it's a Hakeem Adeniji type pick in the 5th round where they take a shot in the dark. Well, then now they're not trading Jonah. Like, I don't even think you could offer them enough to trade Jonah at that point coming out of the draft. You better come through with something significant for them to move on it, because at that point, we've talked for years now about solidifying the offensive line, solidifying 5 starters, having a good enough line in front of Joe Burrow, where I honestly, if you ranked them, and I think you'd feel the exact same way, but it'd be some combination of Orlando Brown, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras is the top 3, probably in that order. Jonah would probably be your 4th best starter, and then Cordell Volson would be the weak link on the offensive line, but hopeful that he takes a step in year 2. So you're not going to trade a guy that isn't the weak link or try to replace a guy that isn't weak link after the draft if you didn't get the guy you wanted.
Yeah, I think the Cordell part of it is interesting because they've stunk at drafting linemen, and they were able to get a guy that I think that has a chance to solidify that left guard spot. I'm not saying I saw enough yet from him, but if you would have told me when they drafted him, like, this kid from North Dakota State's going to start and he's going to beat out Jackson Carman and play the way he did, I think everybody would have taken it. Now, does he take another step? You're right. I think that's the part that's interesting, because if he does, I think he can be that guard for the foreseeable future. If not, then it's like, okay, well, is this a discussion moving forward? So,
and for the same reasons we sold Jonah and why the team probably values him more, they probably think the exact same way out of Cordell Volson, right? Like, character-wise, does all the right things, is the tough guy they want mentally, brings lunch pail guys, bring as a good asset to that room. And also a GM probably looks at it this way. He is a cheap asset. The Bengals are going to need as many cheap assets as possible once the Burrow extension hits. He is one of them. Like, I don't think they're in any hurry to replace Cordell Volson. It would have to be a scenario where, man, we're sitting here in round 2 and Osiris Torrance is still there. Well, he's the best player on our board. Let's take him. And now you figure it out. Right. So you figure it out from there.
Yeah, that would be If he's there at 60, then something has went crazy that we did not expect or anticipate.
You don't like mock draft scenarios where you end up with a center guard type guy, a Tippmann, or where that's still there, and you're like, you know what?
Tippmann round 3 earlier this week. The kid out of Ohio State would be interesting too. What do you? So you're not a fan of Bergeron? Just real quick, you said that kid.
I've got him right. I've got him like a 4th round film grade. So like he's a lot of Jonah. He doesn't have the length and bulk and anchor in him. I think he's a good enough athlete. He's not going to be the biggest tackle. He's not going to play with a lot of strength. Sometimes he's still very slow and late to react on a lot of things. Stunts and twists. I think his hands still need a lot. I think he's a project. I think he was the worst player on a good Senior Bowl group, and he was the worst starting offensive lineman of the 5 that were there. Darnell Wright was the right tackle who stood out instantly. But like in comparison, they're not even close. I don't think he's a plug-and-play starter at all. Bergeron is, and I think he's got limited upside.
Yeah, and the limited upside part, it makes you want the Blake Freelands or the insert, whatever guy.
If I can, I did a thing on Bengals on the Brain. James, you may have heard of that show before. Where I did a segment on Blake Freeland, and I think Freeland could go in round 2. I think he's projected for 3rd. Some even have him as a 4th. Consensus puts him in the end of the 3rd or middle of the 3rd round. So the years we've been doing this and grading these guys out and building up a formula, anyone who grades 80 plus at offensive tackle, the latest they've been picked is pick 72 in the 3rd round. So if the Bengals did like him, it would have to be at 60. And I think Freeland played the first 2 years at BYU at right tackle. He played the last 2 years at left tackle. If you use PFF scoring or grading, his pass block efficiency, how often he gives up pressures and sacks, the lowest of any guy in this class. And he's 6'8" and tested like an elite athlete. Honestly, he reminds me of like a Brian O'Neill, who's the starting right tackle for the Vikings, with a little bit of Colton Miller, who's the starting left tackle of the Raiders.
And the thing about Freeland, that one, you could sit him behind Jonah. I still think that would be it. But he could add that weight, and it has the size that Pollock is looking for.
That's the other part. He's 6'8", but 302-ish.
Yeah, I mean, my God. I mean, if I was 6'8", I'd be 350. Like, he's thin for an offensive lineman of his stature. So you have him add 20 pounds, and I think he could easily carry the 20
He's
pounds.
He's young still. He's not an older guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's going to be fun. I think we're both in agreement that Jonah, the favorite to be right tackle, but that could change with one pick. You mentioned Bengals on the Brain, which you can catch on Cincinnati Bengals Talk every Tuesday with Joe Goodberry at 8:00. You also, your Twitter subscribers, tell everyone, I should have done this much earlier. Tell everyone what they're getting with this Joe Goodberry Twitter subscription at Joe Goodberry on Twitter.
Yeah, so right off the bat, it may sound weird to subscribe to somebody on Twitter and throw $5 a month at them, but the idea is to help out your favorite content creators, give them the ability to make more of your favorite content, to go deeper into things. There's a lot of projects that I've wanted to do over the years that either didn't get approved by editors at The Athletic or other places that I've written, or maybe James says, nope, we can't do a show on that, Joe. You can't. Right, that never happens. But the point is that I can do more of it. And there's sometimes I'm breaking down film that is great for the show of like Bengals on the Brain. But then there's other times where I only have TV copies and we can't post that stuff on YouTube, right? So I'll do an 8-minute video and keep it for subscribers on my Twitter page. And I'll break down that player because it's not something I can post anywhere else but Twitter.
So make sure you check it out at Joe Goodberry on Twitter. Joe, this was awesome. Back-to-back days, throwback to the throwback of Locked On Bengals. And who knows, maybe we'll do this again soon, but I really appreciate you coming on the past couple days.
Thanks for having me, James. And I'm sure we'll get together either on draft in that weekend or right after.
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt about that. For Joe Goodberry, I'm James Erpine. Jake Lisco is just fine, by the way, but Joe's subbing in the past couple of days. So until next time when it'll be Mock Draft Monday yet again, I'm James Erpine signing off for now. Thank you so much for listening and watching the Locked On Bengals podcast.